You're listening to the Haney Company Financial Guy Show. No nonsense, just a crazy mix of life, business, the funny, and of course we're going to talk about your money. But just sit back, relax, and enjoy the ride. What could go wrong? All right, welcome to another episode of the Haney Company Financial Guy Show. I am pretty excited to kind of tread into a topic that I've looked forward to talking about for a long time, but I've never had the right person to talk to. So Diane Boyle, thank you for joining me today. I am really, really excited for our conversation.
I am too, Brian. Thanks. I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
I mean, who doesn't like to talk about politics, right? Outside of like religion, right? Aren't those the top two things that nobody should ever talk about, right? We don't want to get into. So
sure. That's where I dive straight in. So there's no problem there. Give me a topic that we're not supposed to talk about, and I'm have the gift of gab, so I'll dive right in.
Head first. I love it. Fantastic. So I know you were prepared because the first four questions are incredibly difficult. So we'll just get them out of the way one at a time. What is the number one place that you want to visit on your bucket list, but you haven't visited yet?
Okay, so I have two. I can't do just one. The first is the Amalfi Coast, because I haven't been there, but have been to a bunch of places in Italy. The second is Greece, because I haven't been to Greece at all. So either one of those would satisfy top must go to travel that I haven't been to.
Awesome. Love both of those. I haven't been to the Amalfi Coast. I've done Italy and I have done Greece. I'm a huge Greece enthusiast. So yes, I would.
Okay. Well, when I plan my trip, we should get together.
100%. Oh my gosh, I love Greece. Such a great place. So, all right. Out the gate, we are winning on this. Okay. What food will you not eat under any circumstance?
Well, you talked about politics. I'm slowly realizing that I'm not answering any of your questions, which is it's perfect for a political discussion, right? That I'm going to give you the answer that I want. I'm from Louisiana. There's no food that I won't eat. As a matter of fact, it reminds me of there was the story, and it goes where they're a mama crawfish and a baby crawfish, and they're out in the field walking around, and they come across a cow, and little baby crawfish, immediately the claws go up, and the mama crawfish goes, no, don't worry about that. That's a cow. Cows don't eat crawfish. So they walk a little further, and all of a sudden the mama crawfish claws goes up, and the baby looks and says, "What's wrong?" So that's a Cajun. They'll eat anything. So I actually don't have foods that I won't eat. There's things that I don't like, but there's nothing that I'm not willing to try. And probably if you can fix it, I'll give it a go, even if I don't like it for a second round of something. So yeah, I got nothing on what I won't eat.
I have to say, in over 50 plus episodes, that is a first, and I love it. But, we can usually always find one thing. For me, it continues to be and will always be insects. I don't care. Like it just, people say, hey, we can dip them in
consider crawfish
chocolate.
Insects? They're buggish, but not really.
Yeah,
they're crustaceans.
Yeah. Well, and I don't enjoy the crustacean part of the seafood palette anyway. Like I don't really seek out or am interested in crabs or lobster or all that kind of stuff. That's not on my palette that I would enjoy. I wouldn't avoid it if I had to. But yeah, crawfish, those seem to be, I think you're right. They're closer to me insect than not. But yeah, I'm not. It's just not happening. I don't care. I'm not even going to try. I know that I've seen crushed insect flour. I'm like, I'm not even doing that. Like, you can't even bake it away. If I knew that that's what it used to be.
If I know what it is, you're not touching it.
It's just not happening. Not happening. You can't even trick me. So we'll stay with the food theme. If you could have dinner with a famous person, it can be anybody in human history. So they can be alive, they can be dead. Who would you want to share a meal with?
And like I said, I'm doing horribly on my first four questions because my answer here, whenever given an opportunity to eat with someone who has passed, it's always going to be my dad.
I love that.
With that question. I'm not starstruck. So like I
Sure.
certainly recognize that they're historians that I would love to be with, but when given that choice of pick a person, it's not going to be somebody famous. It's going to be my dad.
That resonates with me too. Having lost my mom not too long ago, I think maybe I probably would rather have a meal with her again than other.
Yeah, it's sort of the
or,
person that know what that conversation is going to be. If it's someone who's famous or in history that you can read about them, like I'm not going to develop a relationship with that individual in my one meal. But the one meal that I lost was somebody that I did know, like you're saying with your mom passing, you know what that relationship is. You know what that conversation is going to be like. And you're going to cherish that, I think, I would cherish it far greater than anyone else that I don't know.
I love that. Yeah, I agree. And maybe I'd have to ask her. I was like, Mom, maybe we invite somebody famous and we'll all like that's
Yeah.
because she was a social butterfly. So her answer would absolutely be yes. And it didn't matter who it was. She's like, yeah, bring it on. So
Yeah. My dad would be the same one. Large groups.
I love it. All right. Besides this podcast, are there any other podcasts or shows that you would recommend that you've enjoyed, that you've gotten value out of, that you would share with the audience?
I can. The challenge is, unless you're a 50 or over woman, you're probably not going to be interested. But the podcast that I listen to is actually from a friend of mine who we grew up together as kids. And she's a huge fitness and nutritionist. And so she has a podcast, and it's Get Unstuck. And it's geared toward women over 50 on how do you maintain routine? How do you get the right nutrition? How do you make sure that you're exercising for the second half of your life? And so, and she always encourages, which I think is always kind of interesting, because a lot of times it's not when I'm walking. Sorry, Heather, you're supposed to put in your earbuds and take a walk and then listen to the podcast. Those are sort of the requirements. And sometimes it's just, when I'm in the car. So, but I do try to do that. And I do find that interesting. And it creates, not only is it the podcast that she has where she shares whatever topic is sort of trending and walks through it. It's sort of a unique community. And I find it particularly helpful because we grew up together. So she's actually younger than I am, the type of podcast, like we're 60 and over. But anyway, I digress. It's a good one. So that's what I listen to.
Sounds awesome. I love that. Is being married to a wife who is a health and nutrition coach and all that. I love how I think now podcasting, in addition to other kind of mediums, is really allowing more people like her. You said Heather, is that right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Heather
To be able, awesome. Yeah, to be able to reach, refine, like target audiences, so that way the message really hits home and really resonates. Because I think that's frankly, especially in an area like health and wellness, that has been too much of a, everybody needs to take this pill or do this exercise or eat this way. Like that's not just not true. Like bioindividuality is a real thing. So I think that sounds fantastic. And I'll certainly have to check it out. See if my wife will check it out as well. Because, she loves all of that stuff too. So that's good. That was a great way to start the first four. Not as hard. So maybe I need to toughen up some of these questions. But let's talk about you, because you've had a pretty fun professional journey. And what you get to do every day is pretty interesting, being on the front lines of the political landscape. But, just tell the audience about your journey and how you got to where you are, and maybe any of the highlights that don't all have to flow through the professional channel per se. But if there's one really cool, quirky thing about Diane Boyle that you want to share with a mass audience on a podcast, feel free to include that.
Great. Thanks. Yeah, I do. I love my job. I love what I'm doing. I love talking with legislators and feeling like we're making a difference for the financial professionals that we represent in APA. My journey, if you get started, goes back. I mentioned that I was from Louisiana. So I started in the Louisiana State Legislature. I worked there for delegation. We have parishes, not counties there. So it was the Jefferson Parish delegation. And it had 7 senators and 14 representatives. And so that was sort of my start into politics, unless you want me to go all the way back to grade school. I won't do that to you. But that was my first professional launch. And to give you an idea, the current majority leader in the House, Scalise, is from Jefferson Parish. So he actually did, he served, but after I had moved to DC. So I didn't work with him there. But that's the area. And that kind of got me started. Then I worked for 2 members of Congress from Louisiana when I first moved up here. And that's sort of you talk about an interesting kind of quirky story, is I left the Hill because I had a little saying to go with it, why I left the Hill, right? I didn't want my job security to be tied to their popularity. Whenever you're working for a legislator, especially somebody who's in the House, every 2 years they're running. And so the anxiety level of, am I going to have a job based off of this member's popularity? It was a little unsettling. So loved the world, but didn't necessarily want to stay on the Hill. So I left the Hill, went to work for actually a soft drink association, was my first foray out Hill Light and then to Nathan. I've actually been there for a month. But when I was on maternity leave, the member of Congress that one of the members of Congress that I had worked for on the Hill was put up to be Speaker of the House. And so your wife will probably share this with you as well. When you're home on maternity leave, you have full-blown conversations with this infant who has no idea what you're talking about, but you do. So I'm watching unfold my former boss being put up for Speaker. And so I'm looking at my son and I'm like, such an idiot. How cool would it be to work in the Speaker's office? Like, that would be a really cool job. 3 days later, there's like a whole scandal. He not only steps down from being the nominee for Speaker, but also completely resigns from Congress. He finds all of he handled it well. He went and made sure that he was staying further in order to reposition all of his staff. But like, these were my former colleagues, that he's making sure they have new jobs. So that I'm looking back at the infant again. I'm like, I'm so smart. My son is now 25. And I don't know that he would agree with I'm so smart, but I'm probably somewhere in the middle. I was a lot dumber when he was in teenage years. He definitely would have disagreed with your mom's so smart. I'm sort of easing back into that mom's not an idiot category. So, but then, so I was working with Daniel. As I said, I've been with NAPA for 32 years, which is a really, really long time. But, it's representing people like you, Brian, that makes my job easy, because I really do believe in the work that you do to help people. So it never is unsettling. If you work as a lobbyist, if you're representing someone that you don't believe in, or if there's an issue that comes up that doesn't quite sit right with you, it would make your job really hard. I don't have those things. I really don't. What you do to serve people and make their lives better and more financially secure makes it really easy for me to have conversations with legislators to say, hey, let's review policy and make sure that we're helping people to save for retirement or to make sure that they're planning for their business, whatever the issue of the day is. So that's sort of who I am, how I got here.
I love that. And we NAFA could not have picked somebody better. So I just have to absolutely say, please don't leave. Right. I don't know what the contract Kevin has for you says, but there better be a giant asterisk that says Diane Boyle's here for life, because you do such a great job to help us handle the politics of money, which, to your point, I really think shouldn't be divisive, right? We should all want to do money well, right? To have a good financial experience and have the financial services industry represent our interests in the best way possible. But I think sometimes not everybody necessarily sees how that needs to unfold the same way. And, that's frankly why you're there on the front lines for us. So thank you for doing that. And, you mentioned something, and I guess I just want to ask this question, because I think it's safe to say, right? We're native Australian. We've been in DC long enough. Not everybody has the warm and fuzzies for the word lobbyist. But so, what would you say to someone, though, that for whom the word or the term or the role doesn't sit very well? What would you say about that?
Well, I had this conversation with my husband quite often. We educate, and it is. There's a connotation that goes. What's funny is that my husband is an attorney, so I'm like, oh, really? And he's like, so we battle with each other, right? Who has the worst reputation? And they're bad in both businesses. You can have a bad lobbyist, you can have a bad attorney who's out there, but really what the lobbyist job is and should be is to work with legislators to educate them. You mentioned something about the politics of money and the importance of it. The reason it's so important is that, and this is really any industry, there's no one representative who's going to be elected who is going to understand in depth all of the issues that they have to address. It's impossible. So it's not a slight on them, but they have to rely on people who have ties back to the industry that they're making decisions about, who can inform them. And one of the things that I think we'll talk about in a little bit later is the current challenges that faces our industry and what we need to do. We're talking huge amounts of money. And if you're looking at how do you derive revenue, because the federal government, and you've heard me say this a bazillion times, the federal government does not have bake sales. The only way that they generate revenue is through the tax code. So they have to look to find where the money is. Then they're going to look at where can they change the tax status to generate revenue for the government. to pay for the things that they want to do. That's how it's done. That's not, there's no political slant to that. That's a factual statement. Where you get into sort of the political side of it is if they don't understand what that number represents, and it's easy for them to sort of pluck whatever that item is and say, oh, okay, I could find X number of dollars by changing the tax status here and then funding something else that I would do. If they don't understand what that amount or that tax status represents in the way of their constituents, the people that they were elected to represent, how does that impact them? Then they're going to make bad decisions. So the lobbyist's job is to go in and whoever they're representing, and frankly, when you've lobbied, you've come in, you do it as a constituent lobbyist. I happen to be a paid lobbyist. But when you go in and have a conversation and share your expertise with a lawmaker and then ask them to make a decision based on that information, you are lobbying. And that's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing at all. So it's when you understand it as education and what's really heartwarming, if you will, for a lobbyist who is told quite often, right? Like you're part of the problem, is when the legislators come back and say, there's no way I have to be able, and like I said, they're good and bad lobbyists. And so you'll hear members say, I need somebody that I can trust to run this by. So you have to develop that trusted relationship. That's on the lobbyist to establish that level of relationship and trust with a lawmaker and their staffs to know, okay, I can contact Diane and I know that she's going to tell me the truth. She's going to tell me how it impacts her members. She's going to tell me who is actually going to be against her and why, because that's what I do. Like, hey, we're asking you to push back on something, but this is where you may see resistance. I still think I'm right. I still think the policy that we're advocating for makes a difference and is the right way to go. But no, not everyone agrees with me. Here's where you're going to hear some pushback. And then that legislator has to make that decision. But you're helping them by providing them information.
And I love something that you said in that. And I, and I've seen you share it so eloquently so many times, but I really think it's humanizing these issues and making them real because you said it so well. Looking at taxes and thinking about revenue in an aggregated sense to fund major government initiatives and all that kind of stuff, that's very arbitrary. And it's easy, I would think, to kind of step into that arena and not see it for what it is, not to see all of how those dominoes fall and how all the consequences of a certain change, decision, what have you, would actually unfold. Like, you're just really looking a lot of times at, a revenue opportunity or this or that. So, I think that's certainly what I would categorize as a good lobbyist, but just kind of what the role is in general is making sure that those that are representing our interest in elected offices understand the human component to the decision-making framework that they're trying very hard to understand and to be responsible for.
Yeah. Well, and what's really interesting, getting into some of our issues, and I won't nerd out on you too deeply, I promise. But they look at a budget window of 10 years. So in our industry in particular, you're looking at promises that span beyond the 10-year window. So you have to have those conversations as well as it's not just what you're seeing here, but think beyond, because our industry is taking in, if you're looking at an insurance product, premiums now for payout, or even looking at long-term care insurance, where you're coming in and you're funding a future expense that's outside of that 10-year window. And so you're right. It is easy to look at the numbers and not quite get the human, and they're not to be faulted for that. They need to have they don't have that information. So if we don't provide it to them, that's on us, not on you.
I totally agree. And I do want to actually get into the present day and have a lot of that nerd out conversation, because I do like that. And I certainly want to make sure the audience gets a chance to see what's going on, because we've got some pretty critical things happening, and this is a fairly pivotal, critical time. But I'm a bit of a history enthusiast, and your perspective on this is going to be extremely valuable. What would you say have been some of the most significant legislative pieces that impact the financial industry that you could say in recent memory, or are things that have a significant impact that maybe we don't necessarily understand? Like, oh, this is why it is this way. Just, top 2, top 3 things that you would say, yeah, this was a landmark piece that changed the way we do money.
right? I'm not going to scare you. Don't be scared when I throw out the first one, which was in 1913, because I won't go from there each year. But in 1913 was the establishment of the income tax. Part of that was the exclusion, life insurance, death benefits, the cash build up within a policy. And that's significant. That forms the whole sort of basis around life insurance. And it has stuck since 19, and we've had lots of challenges, and I wasn't around for the first one, but NAFA was. And they went in and had a conversation with President Wilson back in the day to discuss. And his response was, why would I tax people who are voluntarily choosing to tax themselves? And it makes a lot of sense. But we go back and we constantly face that. Is there an opportunity? And we talked about it a little bit earlier, to change the tax status of the life insurance policy, particularly that cash value within the policy, because there's a lack of understanding of why it exists, the purpose of it, how it can be utilized to save businesses and families, and the list goes on and on, right? Provide living benefits, like all of the uses that help to provide financial security for individuals and small businesses that don't then have to rely on the government safety net. And so when you put all of that together, it sort of makes sense. But anyway, so that's a big one. The other bids were probably the creation of the individual retirement account, which NAPA had its hand in, and 401k plans. In my tenure, you're looking at the creation of medical savings accounts, which then turned into health savings accounts and ABLE accounts for disabled individuals to participate in favorable accounts and save for some of their needs, which is really interesting. NARAB. So if you look at licensing of members, that was something that we were involved in. So on the retirement side, you're looking at Secure 1 and 2, which enhanced and provided additional options for employers and individuals to save for their retirements. There's pandemic relief that we were involved in, and that was helpful. There was for small businesses, there was remote online notarization at the same time. So like when you see these pandemics come in, we still go in and make the case of how do we make our systems work? And so we did that. There was also the Senior Save Act was put in. So we try to be proactive where we're looking to say, we don't want to see our senior population exploited in a financial sense. And so we need some protection on that. And I'll stop there unless you want me to go on. The list is long, but it's fun and it's meaningful, and you sort of forget. And then you look back and you go, wait a minute, I remember working on that. And I remember someone giving a presentation recently because there were some enhancements to the ABLE Act as part of the Tax Cut and Jobs Act in 2017. And, when that expires, it could negatively impact ABLE accounts. I don't remember who it was, but anyway, someone was talking and they said, and ABLE accounts, and I'm like, I actually lobbied to have the ABLE accounts created and enacted. Yeah, I'm very familiar with the ABLE account. So that's when the pride comes in, right? That you actually worked on things that really make a difference in people's life.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you covered more than I would have imagined, and we also didn't get into things like ERISA or Sarbanes-Oxley or Dodd-Frank or all the other traditional things that I think probably for some practitioners are like, oh yeah, those things kind of they're always there, but they're probably not, I think, as day-to-day practical as the ones that you listed. So I love that. Yeah, and yes, I mean, there's a lot that I think most people experience across the footprint of our country that we've had to be on the front lines to either enact or create and also defend and preserve, not because necessarily any one party or politician is anti something or out to get us or what have you, but because it's a challenging climate, especially when you're talking about a debt that's 30 plus $trillion, and that's real money. It's not monopoly money. Yeah, and it's got to be paid somehow. Like there's no magic formula or wand that just makes it go away. So I think that's really, really important. And so let's then bring that to current day. I mean, what would you say the general state of financial politics and advocacy looks like? And maybe we should start to walk through some of the things that it's going to be important, not just for, I think, NAFA members to be aware of and people that are in our industry, but I think it's really important for people across all industries to be aware. Like, these things are going on that actually can have an impact on your daily lives.
Yeah, well, I think the biggest, and this is what we're spending most of our time on right now, is in 2025, there are a number of tax provisions that expired that were put in place as part of the 2017 Tax Cut and Jobs Act. That's going to impact rates on individuals. Anyone who's listening is going to be impacted by that if Congress doesn't act, which I think they will. What they do, we don't know. As you mentioned, there are deficits. So there's some members that are saying, look, we've got to start paying this down. We can't just continue to move forward and without some real due diligence on what tax policies we're putting in place. And again, it's that tinkering with the tax code is how you're going to derive revenue, which can either offset the debt, pay for new initiatives, continue initiatives that we have out there that are expiring. And the key, and I've said this to many of our members, and I'll say it to any other industry. I just don't know how you necessarily apply it. You have to humanize the tax code. Absolutely.
Oh, yes.
Every provision that is being considered is going to need to be humanized. If you look at just the 2017 to the 2025 Congress, and we have in between that an election cycle, right? So in November, we're going to have a whole slew of new members of Congress. Let's put that aside. If every member of Congress who is running for office is reelected, only 85 of them were in Congress in 2017. There are 435 members. 85 will remember what happened in the conversations that took place in 2017 that said, what negotiations, what balances, what trade-offs do we need to develop this tax policy? So we have to start educating those members now. Then in November, we're going to have a new slew of people. And we know without the first member losing an election, an incumbent losing an election, there are going to be 50 new members of Congress, just from retirements, people running for different offices, etc. So there's going to be a whole new wave of legislators. And chances are they're not going to know the ins and outs, and certainly not if they even understand the policy. Let's say it was a Brian Genie that was running for office and was elected, and I'd say, oh, good, Brian knows what's going on. You may understand how to humanize our industry as it relates to the tax code, but what you would be missing was the exchange and the process of negotiation. And I think a lot of people miss on, and you mentioned earlier that our issues are nonpartisan. They're not. We're looking for financial security. There has to be negotiation and compromise. No one is going to get what they want 100% of the time. So when you're looking at the tax code in particular, there's going to be some give and take. Even if you get a sweep, I don't care if the Dems won a clean slate and they end up with the presidency, the House, and the Senate, which is looking really unlikely right now. But even if they get that within the Democratic Party, you're going to have different groups that have different priorities. So how do you negotiate and get a deal? Same on the Republican side. If you get a Republican sweep, there are different factions within the party that are going to say, no, I want to pay down the debt first and foremost. Or you're going to have some that are going to say, no, I want to renew the tax cuts that we had put in place before because we feel like they pay for themselves. And it's actually somewhere in between. If you look at reality of what happened with the tax cuts that were put in place, some of them paid for some lift. Did they pay for themselves in entirety as a package? Probably not. It added to the deficit. But so how do you find that sweet spot? And not having that history is really challenging. So we go in with the stories and say, look, when you're looking at this policy, if your only desire, and I'm going to pick one that I actually think is probably a good thing, when everyone sort of goes, oh my gosh, that debt is huge. Let's say that somebody's sole initiative was to bring down the debt, then they would be eliminated. They would look to tax absolutely everything. Our job would be then to go in and say, okay, as a starting point, let me tell you why this tax policy is good. When we have people that plan for their financial needs, when they're self-sufficient, when they're able to save for their retirement, then it's an offset on the public safety net that's needed for those who aren't able to do so. So if you take that away, how does that shift the dynamics of funding needs for a public program? And then you start, right? So now you have somebody thinking, okay, and so tell me, how do these products work? So then you go back to what are the products and services that you offer to individuals that actually help improve in service of partner with the public programs that are out there to help people financially.
That's it's so interesting how something can be so singular, right? The fact that yeah, we have a national budget and a national debt, and that the dominoes fall across, from there to a lot of areas,
Oh, sure.
economically, financially, politically, et cetera. And yet, the significance of us handling how to do that very well. Yeah, I mean, it continued. I guess, in theory, the can be kicked down the proverbial road for a little while longer, but I don't, I mean, at some point there's a tipping point and things are going to have to, levers are going to have to be pulled. And so, I think that what you're talking about and why this isn't just a financial industry issue, it cannot be understated. I mean, this is an all hands on deck issue, regardless of political persuasion. How do we really make sure? Frankly, if we're talking about making Americans financially healthy, I think it's also probably pretty important for our country and its infrastructure to be financially healthy and thoughtful about how they go about engaging and how their decisions impact Americans. That this is going to be an interesting time.
No, and you're right. When you start thinking like outside of our industry, which is always interesting too, because I lobby for our industry, so I know what provisions I'm looking for that make sure that our members and the clients that they serve are put in a situation that helps them. But when you talk about and talked about negotiation, right, and coming to compromise too, take all of the energy tax components. How do they factor in? So none of it can be looked at in isolation. My job is to be very focused. The legislator's job is to be very broad. So it goes back, and now I'm giving a justification for my profession again. But their knowledge level is very broad, but very shallow. They look to each individual industry to provide that depth. And they have staff that are dedicated. But even within the staff assignments, they're having broad issues. So they're looking for trusted resources. And so whether you're in the financial services industry or another industry, you should really focus on making sure that you're meeting with those legislators and those staffs and providing yourself and your knowledge, your expertise in a given area as a source of information and a resource.
Well, and since obviously the financial industry, back to where we do money and how we do money, we're not just regulated and impacted federally, obviously state and even local comes to the table. Kind of, let's talk a little bit about some of the risks that I think our industry faces in all of those domains that I think it's really important for people to be aware of, that I think, and what we're seeing and what we have seen is, while we talked about money being a nonpartisan issue, right? Being able to have financial security and do money as well as we can should be kind of a fairly even keel cut across American life. It seems like of late that's not always the way other parties see it. So let's talk about just kind of some of the risks that I think our industry is facing. That, again, I think the intention of legislation doesn't always have a negative twist to it, right? We all come to the table with the best of intentions. It's just how those intentions then play out practically and what the subsequent impact is on either the delivery of services or the impact of the professionals delivering those services. So what would you say are some of those, what are some of the things that we're dealing with that maybe not everybody's aware of?
I think I'm seeing this. So the partisan nature of politics right now is particularly tough. It is an election year. So election year politics do come into play. You'll see a lot of the congressional activity right now is very much messaging. So it's very much one party trying to push through legislation so that they're going to have good campaign minutes to talk about what they were working on. And it's both sides of the aisle. So I'm not trying to slam one party over the other. It's the unfortunate reality of an election year. So we're seeing that. I think that's interesting. You mentioned the states too, which is absolutely true. And I should have listed that in one of the wins. So the Karen Ferguson actually established that the states really have priority in regulation over the insurance industry. So our industry, if you're looking from the insurance side of it, is really regulated at the state level, not so much at the federal level. And so we have the 50 state legislatures that are making those decisions and weighing. And I think, and this isn't so much, well, I guess it is a challenge. but I see it more as an opportunity and something fun that we're working on is actual financial literacy. So if you start getting into, right, you do it even with your own kids. Actually, the story there that I'll share, which I think is pretty funny. My son probably does not think it's so fun. But getting financial literacy to kids to start thinking about it sooner than finding out that they're an adult and not understanding the relationship that they have with money is a tough one. So we've been working with the state legislatures to make sure that high school graduates are guaranteed a semester of personal finance before they graduate. And 26 states have adopted it. And they're not all implemented yet, but we're making steps there. So I think that's really exciting to see. The story that I'll share is, as I said, you start with your own kids, but what we've learned with the financial literacy programs is it's not just the kids that are walking away with that education. It's the teachers that are providing the courses. Though a lot of times when the legislatures are pushing it through, the teachers are sort of the first ones to go, I don't know that I'm qualified to provide that context. And so we have to help them. But so once it's implemented, you have the teachers who have been learning. You have the kids who, unfortunately, those that are really needing that personal finance class in high school probably didn't get the education at home because the parents don't have it. So the parents, there's a ripple effect, if you will, that when you're teaching it for that high school student, it's the teacher, it's the parents, it's an extended community that is actually learning, which is a really good thing. And I think it's good public policy to have that in place. And it's going to help with people coming out across the board. It's going to be good for you for business because you're going to have people who come in with some basic understanding. You're not helping somebody dig out of debt. You're helping them plan for future expenses, which is a much better place to be. You're going to have individuals who are coming out who wouldn't be able to see you for service at all, not needing to rely on public assistance as much because they're not getting themselves into a situation that they can't get out of. So it's just good all around. The story that I was going to share is when my youngest son, God bless Amazon, had a wish list on Amazon, ordered when we were away for spring break, like $1,200 worth of junk on Amazon because Amazon had one click. Highly recommend. So here's a good little tip for all of your listeners with young children. Disable Amazon one click if you have it and they have wish lists because they can move stuff from their wish list to the cart and it arrives on your phone. It's a lovely little system. So anyway, we sent all of that back. It was a really fun time in that family. But where I knew the silver lining of that whole experience, which was enjoyable at the time, was that the following Christmas, he asked for debt forgiveness as one of his Christmas presents. And I'm like, yes, my kid understands debt. He understands forgiveness. He understands payback. He's lying, and he's 8. He was 8 at the time. But so anyway, so financial literacy is really interesting. I got off topic, but what am I supposed to be naming for you? Challenges from the industry? Yeah, so I think that's it. I think as an industry or as a citizenship, really, we're facing some really challenging times as far as the financial stability of the government. Forget about financial stability of individuals. But if you're looking at our governments being financially stable, how do they get there? And again, no bake sales. So it means they're going to be looking at the tax code. And it means that they need to look at it with as much information and humanization as can be provided. And so that's a real opportunity. I mean, it makes me nervous, the time frame in which they have to act, because a number of those provisions that we talked about expire at the end of 2025. So they need to make some decisions pretty quickly, getting people up to speed who are going to be elected in November to make those decisions the next year. It isn't a big runway. If you look at 2017 was probably the last biggest tax change prior to 1986. I would say that was probably the other big. In 2017, they were having working groups, members of Congress were having working groups in 2011, 2012, working up to 2017. Some tax teams that were just formulated in Congress, but it's 2024. They need to act in 2025. So they're going to be drinking from a fire hose as far as information, and we're going to do our part. Unfortunately, sorry they have to drink from a fire hose, but if you do, we're going to make sure that we have our hose hooked up first, right? And are getting trying to get that information. And I think Life Happens, which I know you know very well, produces some of the sorts when it talks about how financial professionals work with clients to secure families and to secure businesses. And it documents that experience. We're sharing those. That's the information. Hopefully, we have until October to submit information to the tax teams. I don't think we should wait until that. We will submit something probably next week after. We're pulling it together now so that we can have it there. And there's nothing that says that if something doesn't come about or if they need additional information, that we can't provide it again, a second submission. There's no limitation on how many times we can go in. But I think the sooner that we get that information out to the tax teams, the better we're going to be positioned, because that'll start with one thing who understands. What's sort of unfortunate from my perspective is that the tax teams in the House are Republican. They were established by the current chairman, and they don't include the Democrats that are on the committee. And I sort of get why. As I mentioned, it doesn't matter whether you have a sweep by one party or another, that there are different groups within each of those parties that need to sort of come together to have an understanding. And so I think that's why the chairman started with his conference in the tax teams or Republican, because they need to get them up to speed from his perspective within his party. But at some point, you're going to have to bring in the Democrats. And so when we submit our tax team information, we'll share it with the minority as well to make sure that they have that information. Are they looking at it in the same way? Are they having the same type of discussions? Not in the same format, but we're making sure that because you need every vote. And you've heard me say this too. And when you look at elections, I don't care who you vote. I don't care who you send me. When they get to Congress, that's the sandbox that you've created for me. And we have to figure out how to make that work. So we're going to share our information with every member of Congress that is there now, and start having those conversations. We start with the committees of jurisdiction. So it would be with Ways and Means and Senate Finance Committees, where we're focusing our activity branch out.
No, it's the window's shrinking, and it's certainly going to be a another mad dash to kind of get everything together. But this is a critical time, and I think it's really one where it is important for everyone to be aware of the significance of the job that needs to be done. Because heading into 2025, 2017 was significant and impactful. 2025 is going to be the same way, one way or another. And so, while it's easier, I think, to grab on to maybe other political topics that, are in different categories that probably have more emotional connections to it, maybe taxes and money doesn't always have that same emotion to it, but it hits all of us, right? Regardless of what we do and all of that. And so I can't understate enough how important it is for every American to be engaged on this. Right. It is going to be far reaching and impactful, and nobody's going to be incubated from that. And it's not a wealthy versus non-wealthy. It's not a, Democrat or Republican. This is just, like you said, the financial health of the nation is all encompassing. And that's what we're fighting for. I want to take one final moment to talk about, we mentioned some of the risks that I think our industry faces. And I guess one that I've seen as a practitioner also in this space, kind of in a lot of, with all of the domains that I've been working in, is one where there has been some, whether it's legislative efforts, I think it's just kind of more, let's just call it the marketing of certain things where, industries can be painted a certain way and practitioners can sometimes be demonized. And again, financial industry is not alone in that. That happened. We were just talking and joking about, attorneys and all the other stuff, right? It's the two bad apples that give the rest of the bunch the reputation, all that kind of stuff. But I think it's probably important for, I guess, any listener to realize that, NAFA and the work that we are doing to stand in is about creating as good of a financial experience for every American as humanly possible, and empowering those practitioners, people in various roles, to be able to deliver as many options to all as we can. So maybe if you just have any kind of statements, or you just want to talk about helping people to be wary about things that come across that kind of demonize that, but also why it's important to allow our industry and the practitioners in the way that they are operating to continue to be able to operate that way.
Sure. And, one of the biggest challenges is probably on the regulatory front, more so than the legislative front. And I know we just have a few minutes left, so I won't go into a whole lot, but the Supreme Court has had some rulings recently that look like they're going to change the dynamics, how some of the regulatory agencies are able to create rules that either demonize, which I don't think they're solely designed to demonize the industry, but they certainly put some restrictions on, as you said, how some practitioners are able to engage and work with consumers. Why I bring that up, though, is that what we're seeing, and I had a conversation with a Ways and Means staffer yesterday on this, and it changes how you have to write and draft legislation, because the legislation can no longer just say the secretary shall, the secretary may, and then send it over to the regulatory agency to sort of fill in the blanks. The legislative body, and in my opinion, it was their job to begin with. So that put my gauntlet down on that one. Like that, when I worked on the Hill, you didn't have these huge gaps, and it wasn't designed to be that way. The legislative body is elected because they are supposed to be responsive to constituents. The regulatory agencies really aren't. And they're not designed that way. But if they're not designed that way, then they shouldn't be making decisions on policies that really were supposed to be legislative in nature. Like if you look at the whole fiduciary issue, there was no legislative prompt.
Mm-hmm.
And there should have been, in my opinion. So anyway, I think, yes, we absolutely need to see legislation, regulation. We need to have consumers to recognize, do your own due diligence. Make sure that the individual that you're working with to help you with your financial needs is someone that a friend has recommended, that somebody has used them before. Sit down and have a conversation with them. Make sure that you have a rapport with them. If you don't, walk away, find somebody else. But to suggest, and there's certain credentials, certainly any education that an individual has gone through is going to make them a better person. It doesn't make them a perfect person. Have those conversations just as you would when you would pick out any other professional. Make sure that you're doing your due diligence there. Be wary of people who say, only if you work with someone like me or in my category, or that's when people have different needs. People have different incomes. They have different, backgrounds, different desires, different goals. All of that matters. And it matters to you as an individual who you fit with. So the idea, and you're right there, I say, even if you go back to sort of that fiduciary rule, we lost a PR battle. We didn't lose the legislative battle when we went through the first time, is that there was a narrative spun that some professionals weren't truly professional. And that's unfortunate. So I would be cautious if you're a consumer, and if you're a professional. Brian and I were talking beforehand. Don't do stupid stuff. Like, let's do your job, do it well, be honest, and you're good to go. And the same on the consumer side. Just make sure you're talking to people and finding a fit that works for you.
Absolutely. Well, any final parting thoughts, shout outs you want to give? And how can people also follow your efforts? Because I know not everybody's going to be reaching out to you directly, but where do you want people's eyeballs to go moving forward?
If you're looking, NAPA.org is a great website. There's actually a consumer component to it once you get there. I think it says consumers. Don't hold me to that one. But if you dig around, you can find sort of the consumer element. And I'm happy to share my information. I can be found at dboyle@napa.org, and would be happy to talk with anyone. As you know, I have the gift of gab. So you've been warned. Should you engage, there will be a conversation that follows.
Well, Diane, it's been great. I'm so surprised we haven't done this sooner. Thank you for being on and helping us talk about the politics of money today. I really appreciate it.
No, happy to be here. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
The information provided in this podcast is not intended as specific tax or legal advice and may not be relied upon for purposes of avoiding any federal tax penalties. The Haney Company, its employees, and representatives are not authorized to give tax or legal advice. Individuals are encouraged to seek advice from their own tax or legal counsel. Individuals involved in the estate planning process should work with an estate planning team, including their own personal, legal, or tax counsel. The information provided here does not constitute personal financial advice, but is meant as the conveyance of information for educational purposes only. All investing involves risk, including the risk of loss. Past performance is not indicatory of future returns. Guarantees are backed by the claims-paying ability of the insurer.
Brian Haney is a registered representative and an investment advisory representative of Dempsey Lord Smith, LLC. Dempsey Lord Smith, LLC is not affiliated with the Haney Company. Securities offered through Dempsey Lord Smith, LLC, member FINRA SIPC. Advisory services offered through Dempsey Lord Smith, LLC, a U.S. SEC registered investment advisor.